Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We're waiting for one of our panelists. Sometimes he does have a little technical trouble, but he's the second panelist, so we're hoping he'll be able to join us soon. All the registrants are muted right now except for the panelists, so we won't be able to hear you. But you can type in questions to the chat box on your screen. This webinar is going to be available on the SSTI website either later on today or tomorrow morning. That is ssti.us. People always ask us if the webinar will be available, so I'm just getting that out of the way in advance. We will have some time at the end for questions. Again, you can submit your questions via the chat box at any time. If you don't see your chat box, you may have to go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen and click on the little orange arrow, and a chat box should come up, and you can just type your question in there, and we'll get to it at the end of the webinar. For those not familiar with SSTI, I do want to give you a very brief overview of what we do, and you can find more information on our work at our website, ssti.us. We are a network of reform-minded state DOTs. SSTI was formed in 2010, and it is housed at the University of Wisconsin. We work in 3 different ways: as a community of practice where participating agencies can learn together and share experiences as they implement innovative smart transportation policies. We also work as with direct technical assistance to our participating agencies on transformative and replicable smart transportation reform efforts. We also serve as a resource to the wider transportation community, including state, local, and federal agencies, in their efforts to reorient practice to changing social and financial demands. And of course, these webinars are part of that outreach to the transportation community. Today's webinar is going to look at the Colorado U.S. Highway 36 corridor, which runs from Denver to Boulder. It is currently a 4-lane road, and it's being expanded with an additional lane to be used by high-occupancy vehicles, bus rapid transit, and cars that are paying tolls. There's also going to be a bikeway added as part of this important commuter corridor. We'll be hearing from Sarah Jo Peterson first for a broad overview of tolling, congestion pricing, and land use. Nick Farber from Colorado DOT will be talking to us about the specific project, how it was implemented, and the financial arrangement for this roadway. And then Toor will follow up with some lessons learned about the US 36 project. So our panelists today, Sarah Jo Peterson is the Senior Director for Policy at the Urban Land Institute, and she is the co-author of the ULI report, When the Road Price is Right, Land Use, Tolls, and Congestion Pricing. She got her start handling land use for the Wisconsin Department of Transportation and has worked at the intersection of transportation and land use for over 20 years. So she is a Wisconsin native, which we were chatting about previously. Nick Farber is the Enterprise Specialist at the Colorado Department of Transportation High Performance Transportation Enterprise, which is a mouthful. It is known as the HPTE, and it was created by legislation in 2009. It is a government-owned business. Technically, it's a division of CDOT, Colorado DOT, but it is governed by its own board. The HPTE, at the enterprise, Nick manages and supervises the tolling system and public-private partnership relationships, and is the project manager on the US 36 Phase 2 Managed Lanes project. Prior to joining the enterprise, he was a transportation policy specialist at the National Conference for State Legislatures, where he worked on innovative transportation finance policy. He has a law degree from the University of Denver, and I'm hoping he'll be able to join us because right now he's not on. And Will Toor will be our final speaker. He's the director of the transportation program at the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, known as SWEEP. He served as Boulder County Commissioner from 2005 to 2012 and the mayor of Boulder from 1998 to 2004. Will spearheaded the effort to create and adopt a countywide sustainable energy plan, the Build Smart Green Building Code, and the Energy Smart Program, the Climate Smart Loan Program, and the Boulder Community Transit Network. That's a lot of great stuff. He also served on the board of the Denver Regional Council of Governments. It's called DRCOG from 1998 to 2012, and he led DRCOG in adopting goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled in the region. He also received his PhD in physics from the University of Chicago, and being a Chicago native, I know that's quite an achievement in and of itself. So I am going to now turn it over to Sarah Jo, and she is going to take it from here. So Sarah Jo, I'm sorry, I just changed the slide for you. You should be able to have control now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Robbie, and thank you, SSTI, for having me. As Robbie already said, I am going to talk about why ULI highlighted Colorado's US 36 in our new report, which was released last March, called On Land Use Tolls and Congestion Pricing, called When the Road Price is Right. But first I'm going to give a little overview for those of you in the audience who aren't familiar with ULI, and also a brief overview of the report. Then focus in on managed lanes, and then focus in again on US 36. So let's see if I have control. Do I have control?
Just click on the slide.
Next slide.
If you could just click on the slide itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And now I'm going to try. No.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and do it. That's fine. Sorry. There we go.
As always, it works when you practice it.
Right.
So, the Urban Land Institute. The Urban Land Institute, for those of you who are not familiar with the organization, was founded in 1936, so it's been around some time. That it now has grown to almost 30,000 members worldwide. Most of the members are actually from the private sector, but all of the members are committed to its mission, which is the responsible use of land in creating and sustaining thriving communities. When the Road Price is Right is one of the products of ULI's infrastructure initiative, and the other reports on this slide are also recent products of ULI's infrastructure initiative, which does convenience, report, and research, all of which are focused on the intersection of land use, real estate development, and infrastructure. And I've also included the website where all these reports are available for free downloads. So next slide. So what brought ULI to tolling and land use? Well, those of you who are working in this area in the state DOTs realize that we're really at a serious cusp of change in the United States with this rise of tolling. And some of it is political, but some of it is also what technology is now allowing, and that's the electronic tolling. And the political support for now variable pricing on toll facilities, pricing that varies by time of day. And electronic tolling and support for variable pricing allows dynamic pricing, pricing that changes versus by conditions of the road. This is all very new. Last 10 years, this technology is making this available. All of these are making available what is called broadly value pricing. And that's when you price the facility or price a service based on how much people value the service, not based on the cost of the service. That's what value pricing is. The most familiar value pricing is, of course, congestion pricing, although I always think that that's kind of a funny term for it. It should be about bypassing congestion pricing or how to avoid congestion through pricing. But that's what it is, and that's what we're going to be focusing on here. But it also allows all road pricing, the vehicle miles traveled taxes or the mileage-based user fees that can become dynamic, that can become based on the conditions of the road. This new technology allows this, plus the political will to do it. So this brought ULI to the question, well, okay, if we're on this cusp of change, we should be asking about land use. will the spread of tolling interact with land use decisions, and how? This cusp of change is rapidly accelerating because of the new federal transportation law passed a little over a year ago, which does now have federal support for the expansion of tolling. This map shows the extent of the reach of the federal support of the transferring of HOV lanes, high-occupancy vehicle lanes, to hot lanes, high-occupancy toll lanes, and that all those orange dots are now eligible to become blue dots. And that's quite a significant rapid shift. But that wasn't the only thing the law did. The law now allows you to toll new capacity on federal aid highways. And then there's the massive expansion of the TIFIA loan and loan guarantee program, all of which is accelerating the thinking that's going on about tolling in the United States. So this is not just theory, it's actually happening now. So a little bit now about the ULI research method. As I said earlier, ULI has 30,000 members, and that's really our research method, is to consult and convene our members and other experts. And so that's what we did for this project for looking at the intersection of land use and tolling, that we looked at experts, but also people with direct experience with types of the decisions that go around this. In the transportation community, you can see the list here of who in the land use community and in the transportation community we actually brought together both transportation and land use in workshops. There was 2 workshops supplemented by interviews. Over 35 people participated in a very structured thought process that came up with, as we looked at this question of how will tolling interact with land use decisions. And going to the next slide, briefly about our conclusions about the interactions with land use. And the answer that the report shows is that it came up with yes. This structured process came up with a yes. Tolling will interact with land use. And the report goes into a little more thinking about how tolling will interact with land use for VMT taxes, for a scenario that looked at tolling the interstates, and that I'm not going to cover today because I want to focus on the value-priced managed lanes, the express lanes, the hot lanes, the bus toll lanes. And here again, the answer was yes. These value-priced managed lanes are and have been, are and will be an amenity for land development. And the way you can tell that something's an amenity for land development is a quick, easy way to tell, is if whether developers advertise it in their ads for their sites and in their ads for their buildings. And there's already plenty of examples of developers saying, hey, I'm near the express lane. This site is near the hot lane. And they may not do it through the clients. They may actually be doing it with the people that ask for money to invest in their developments. Hey, this is a good site. They already are recognizing this. And so that gives it a clear yes. But then when the committee looked at these value price managed lanes as they're going on, the hot lanes I'm going to call now for short, they realized how they're going to interact with land use depends on some key policy decisions. I'm going to go into those a little more, but first I want an aside. So to understand how these hot lanes, for short we're going to call them, interact with land use, you also have to first understand what the trends in land use and development are, because we're taking both of these forward. They're looking at the future of the land use and the future of tolling and how they're interacting. So the committee did, when they're understanding of existing trends, this group process that we developed, the expert process, came to a pretty much strong consensus that in the United States, market preferences for compact mixed-use walkable development, that's the downtowns or some of the suburban new towns, that market preferences for that type of development are growing faster than the type of the development that was common in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where it was single-use and mostly auto-oriented in suburban locations. Since we convened this panel, we've also done ULI has done some polling around this issue and has in the new study, American 2013, has some actual, it was a survey of 1,200 American adults and did confirm what had been sort of the expert take on what was going on, that 54% of Americans today would choose something that looks pretty much like compact mixed-use walkable development if they had a choice. And that this is a growing trend. We also, this survey looked at Americans who are planning to move in the next 5 years. And among these movers, that number is even higher. 62% would like to live close to shops, restaurants, and offices and have transportation options. So that confirms this trend. So the team kept this land use, and I'm asking you to keep these land use trends in time as I talk about the two policy paths that they did. And what they really looked at, since they were convinced that really policy decisions were going to drive more than just the hot lane itself, but policy decisions around it were going to drive the land use impacts, they packaged policy decisions in two separate packages. The first package was the bus toll lanes. And that, under this package, that from the very, very beginning, these network of toll lanes that you're building is seen as part of the rapid transit system from the beginning. And then in this package, the bus toll lane package, the highest priority is to keep transit users moving and to create reliable times to all paying users, which might be other forms of transit. Maybe private transit is also a paying user. But to keep reliable travel times and to keep transit users moving as the highest priority. And that there would be revenue sharing between the transit service, but also thinking of the entire nations in the corridor all the way to sort of a door-to-door revenue sharing as from the infrastructure perspective. Bus toll lanes. The other package they had, which was in some ways these are sort of opposite paths, you know, forks in the road you can take, they're called optional toll lanes. That's when you just think about toll lanes as, oh, we have a congestion bottleneck, let's focus our resources there and bypass that and create the toll lane to bypass. And then we have another congestion bottleneck at the other side of town, and we'll create a toll lane there to bypass that. And to think about each of these projects individually, and perhaps on one project you're going to prioritize speed. It's very important for people on that project that the speed never drops below 55. Another project, maybe the most important thing is the revenue, that you meet your revenue targets. Another problem, or maybe it's about reliability, not so much speed, but it's always, you can always count on at least the reliability of it. So that is a different package. And then the question of, well, sometimes these toll facilities theoretically could create quite a bit of excess revenue, and that you know goes into any excess revenue above operating costs goes into the pot for highways for the rest of the region of the state. And those were sort of the two packages that that they came up with. So okay, small technical difficulty on my side that I've corrected. So two scenarios come up with two different land use outcomes. And here they are. The committees decided pretty clearly that the bus toll lanes help meet demand for development in compact mixed-use walkable nodes. That they create more opportunities for these places to be created under the bus toll lane scenario versus the optional toll lanes, which is likely not to make much difference and in many ways may even support more the auto-oriented development. So that's the theory. Then we want to look at some quick examples. The report also includes 5 brief case studies, 4 that look at mixing tolling and transit. And these are the 4, 1 in Maryland, 1 in Florida, 1 in California, and then the Colorado project that I'm going to focus on a little more. The intercounty connector, if you're not familiar with it in Maryland, is interesting in the sense that it's an entirely new toll road. It's not just lanes. It's an entirely new toll road. They had the Maryland Transit Administration did adopt variable pricing from the beginning, even though there was no congestion on the toll road because it was a new road. But there's time of day pricing, and they provided transit service with some greater or less success on the facility from the day it opened. There was transit service as part of it. That both the I-95 express lanes and the I-15 express lanes in San Diego do revenue sharing also for transit from the toll facilities. And both of these, we already see impacts on land use. That the San Diego case that's been open, they've started with their HOV lanes and their hot lanes back in 1998 already, so they have a bit of a track record. And there are studies that show that houses that are near the express lanes have higher values. That in the Miami-Dade case, that in Broward County, those I-95 express lanes haven't really been open long enough to see land value changes as much, but they can see that certain businesses, certain specific businesses are seeing it to their advantage to be accessing their express lanes in ways that they had not expected. And that these businesses then might see it as an opportunity to be nearer the express lanes. But I wanted to focus on US 36, and this is because from our perspective of all of the 5 case studies we looked at, these weren't supposed to be comprehensive, they were supposed to be representative of different ways of mixing and matching policies. US 36 came the closest to the bus toll lane scenario. That, so just to go over it a little more on the next slide. And one of the reasons is that the Denver-Boulder corridor already has strong bus service. Nationally speaking, from the national perspective, it has some of the strongest bus service as any corridor in the country already existed in that corridor. And that it was conceived of as part of the Denver-Boulder Greater Denver region's regional transit system from the very beginning. If you pull up a map of the regional transit, it'll have the light rail, it'll have the commuter rail, and it'll also have the bus service in this corridor on it. And then the second thing is that they improved the bus infrastructure. Actually, the toll roads, the toll lanes are under construction now, and that is hopefully what Nicholas and will talk about more. But they, in advance of even building the toll lanes, they improved the bus infrastructure. This was funded under a regional sales tax, but they did things like, instead of having to have the bus drive off, exit the highway and go to a park and ride lot and then come back onto the highway, they built slip lanes, and these, as you can see, the pedestrian crossings for the bus service, making considerable improvements in travel time. But they also, in the process of doing this, created what amounts to a bus station, a very large geographic, physical bus station in a highway that then could be seen as an anchor for land development. So this was a place then that we could look to see if the land use connections are being made. And next slide. And they indeed are. And I want to point to you this example of the city of Broomfield, and this is where what I was hoping to be able to sort of point very specifically things, on the, I think, am I moving now the cursor? Can you see me moving the cursor? Robbie?
I have to unmute myself, and
yeah, well, anyway.
yes, but then I could see you moving the cursor, and now you have it again.
Okay, good. So I want to show you this is what I'm circling here is this
muted
station with the big pedestrian crossing that's a very, very visible. Anybody who drives the corridor is going to see that pedestrian crossing. It's like a gateway at point. And that is now anchoring this development in the city of Broomfield. That here is there is an arena that has shared parking with the park and ride with the bus, and the arena parking for the evening, and that's the picture in the bottom is the arena. But there's also housing, there's also shops, all not aligned with the roads, but all focusing on this bus station, this bus stop on a highway. So this is an example, of this coordination between the transit, the highway, and the land use coming up very early in the process and actually showing the synergy that could be created. Now, if you look at the site plan, you see lots and lots of parking. There's lots of parking. This is about providing I see this as about providing transportation options that in a suburban setting, and maybe even for what we call car light living. But it's definitely getting to the place of providing options and a new place that has the type of place that's meeting these growing demands for compact, walkable development. So, conclusion. That, I have one more slide. Oh, I guess I have control now. And I still can't. Oop. Okay, my conclusions. That, so the big takeaway from all of this for
unmuted
that policy decisions make a difference. Policy decisions made very early in the process about how about coordinating with transit, about coordinating with land use can really make a difference for meeting demand for compact, mixed-use, walkable development. And there's huge social equity implications. How many places will be served with high-quality transit and congestion-free options in the United States? That's all tied up into this. And here it's just simple supply and demand. Fewer places, higher prices. More places, the more places affordable these places will be. And that's, that's really the takeaway for us, is that we're excited about the potential here because we see a potential to meet this demand that we know that our members in the real estate industry will be trying to meet. So thank you, and I'd look forward to hearing more about where US 36 is going next.
Great, wonderful, thank you. And Nick has joined us, so I am going to have Nick take over. And I will just change the slide, and then Nick, if you would just click on the slide, you will be able to change them yourself.
All right, sounds good. Good afternoon. I'm Nick Farber with Colorado High Performance Transportation Enterprise. I'm going to talk about quickly what the HPTE is and how we fit in with the Colorado Department of Transportation. A little bit of the history of the Denver Boulder Turnpike, or US 36, how CDOT and RTD have collaborated in the past, and to tell you guys a little bit about the US 36 projects and some of the challenges we had on it, getting it procured and moving forward. Okay, I've clicked. Okay, there we go. The HPTE was authorized by the Colorado legislature in 2009 through our faster legislation. It's part of a broader package that increased registration fees to help fund transportation around the state. We were mandated to pursue public-private partnerships and other innovative and efficient means of financing important multimodal projects around the state. We are a division of the Department of Transportation, but we are governed by our own board. We have there's 7 members. 4 are from the different MPOs around the state. 3 for the different MPOs, and then 1's from the I-70 Mountain Corridor. And then we have 3 transportation commissioners on our board as well. So it's a mix of the public and the commission. So far, we have closed on a $54 million TIFIA loan on the Phase 1 project, which I'll show you in a little bit on the map of the project. And we've come to commercial close on a design, build, operate, finance, and maintain the Phase 2 project and concessionaire. Let's go to a little bit about that on the map in a couple of slides. We have the ability to enter into public-private partnerships from anywhere from on one side of the spectrum, from design build to design build, finance, operate, and maintain. We have the ability to enter into user fee-based project financing, like PABs. We have the ability to borrow without the need for an election, which is significant in the state of Colorado because we have what they call the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which means anytime government issues debt or wants to raise taxes, it has to be approved by a vote of the people. So we are kind of a workaround in that sense. But what that means is that we can only, by this paper legislation, we can only get 10% of our revenue from the state of Colorado. The rest has to come from elsewhere. So we are a very lean, small organization. The Denver Boulder Turnpike was first proposed in 1928. Construction started in 1950, and it was opened for toll collection in January of 1952 for a total cost of $6,300,000. It was financed by a 30-year revenue bonds approved by the state legislature, and tolls were 25 cents. Pictured is the toll collection, or the toll booths, which is right near where Sarah Jo was showing you, right near that RTD station right now. The dog is Shep the Toll Road dog, who had adopted the toll booths, and he was when he passed away, he was subsequently buried near there. The toll booths were all the bonds. Oh, let me go forward a little bit. I'll get there. This is what it looked like back in the 60s, so or the 50s and the 60s. I mean, there was really nothing out there. It's really changed since then, if you know the area. Bonds were paid off in 1967, 13 years early, and this was the day that they stopped collecting tolls. A little bit about CDOT RTD Collaboration. In 1988, RTD, CDOT, and the FTA invested in creating the barrier-separated lanes, which you see in the background. They were originally HOV lanes, and in 2006 they were converted into HOV tolled express lanes. The conversion required state legislation and an amendment to the FDA full funding grant. The full funding grant agreement required that we maintain it at a level of service B, which was later amended to a level of service C. Currently, we have an IGA between an intergovernmental agreement between CDOT and RTD, HPTE and RTD. CDOT took over the maintenance of the facility, including plowing and sweeping. Excess revenue has to go is be shared between RTD and CDOT and has to be spent on transit purposes. There's guaranteed travel time for buses, which is about 8 3/4 from Pecos on US 36 to downtown Denver. And if over a certain period of time, if buses don't, if buses are continually late, we have to either raise tolls or if someone can mute their phone in the background, I hear like honking and stuff. So I appreciate that. It also calls for minimum tolls during peak periods, which is from 6:30 in the morning to 8:45 in the morning, and from 4:30 in the afternoon to 6:30. The tolls have to match express bus fare, and currently tolls range from about 50 cents on off-peak period times to $5, which is not the express bus fare, but that's I think it's $4 for the express bus fare, but we charge a little higher. We have a surcharge for cars that do not have a transponder. Here is a map of the project. I'll use my cursor. The I-25 express lanes come right down here, and they will connect with the new lane. They end right here. The I-25 express lanes end right here for people going north on US 36. The express lanes will then, project starts right here, adding another general purpose lane and managed lanes from all the way up here to 88th, which is a little past Interlochen. Phase 2 will continue all the way up to Boulder. It replaces 5 structurally deficient bridges, adds 12-foot inside and outside shoulders, Phase 2 adds a diverging diamond interchange here at McCaslin, adds bus rapid transit improvements, including electronic display signages at bus stations and bus priority improvement ramps, which were mentioned previously. The BRT system will converge at Denver, or at RTD's new Union Station, which is a little south of here, which is the central hub of their fast track system. It also installs intelligent transportation systems for tolling, transit, and travel information, and incident management. It installs a separate bikeway along the corridor, and improves RTD stations along the corridor. For Phase 2, we entered into a 50-year concession agreement with Plenary Roads Denver. They have the right to collect and retain all revenues generated on Phase 1 and Phase 2, and tolls will be priced according to muted. So they'll have the right to retain and collect tolls on Phase 1, Phase 2, and the I-25 express lanes. And again, the tolls cannot go below RTD express bus fares during peak periods. The BRT service on the project will be equal or better to service on existing rail corridors. It'll be a very frequent service all day to all stations and in both directions. And the picture in the background is what Sarah Jo was talking about earlier, which is there's the First Bank Center in the background, and the pedestrian bridge going across the highway. So how do we bring together this project that mixes bus rapid transit and managed lanes. The concession agreement contains provisions that protect bus and vehicle speeds. The concession agreement maintains a minimum speed of 45 to 55 miles an hour depending on where you are in the corridor for cars, a minimum bus speeds of 50 miles an hour, and hourly volume limits for cars. If speeds drop below hourly volumes, or if speeds drop or hourly volumes go up too high, then Plenary Roads has the ability to raise tolls or move from HOV2 to HOV3. The HOV3, that's one aspect of a trigger we have for going HOV3, and we also have a drop dead date of January 1, 2017, where we projected speeds continually dropping below 45, 55 miles an hour, and bus speeds dropping below because of traffic volumes going up in the managed lanes. A little bit how we funded the project. 2 TIFIA loans, one for phase 1 and one for phase 2. The $54 million loan we have in place, and Plenary Roads is negotiating a $60 million TIFIA loan for phase 2. We also got funding from CDOT. We chipped in a little bit as well. HPTE, RTD contributed significantly for the project. Dr. Cog, local contributions for bridge improvements, slip ramps, and the bikeway. And Plenary is also kicking in private equity as well. So a little bit of our challenges: 2 TIFIA loans, the one public and one private. A lot of negotiation with the TIFIA office on whether one was going to be subordinate to the other, whether they're going to be equal to each other, whether they could be combined. We ended up deciding on that the phase 1 loan would stay in place as is. The concessionaire would just assume it at the end of construction on phase 1, and it would be the phase 2 loan would be subordinate to it. A lot of negotiations facilitating the BRT system, how we would guarantee travel times and toll rates on the lanes. We negotiated a lot with the 3 shortlisted teams with that, and moving from HOV2 to HOV3. We worked a lot with stakeholders to craft what those triggers would look like. And move on to Will. That's all I have, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Great. Well, this is Will. I'd like to thank SSTI for having me on this webinar. And what I'm going to do is really talk about what I think are some of the lessons learned from this project. And I don't seem to have control of the slides. Robbie, could I get the next slide? So on my computer, now I can see it. So first, I think Nick has done a great job of describing the history of this project. And I have sort of a unique relationship with this project, with 15 years as a local government official representing communities along the corridor, and then now am with SWEEP, a nonprofit that's looking at policy issues around transportation and what policy lessons we can learn from the 36 project to help make the next projects be even better. Overall, I think it's been a very positive project, both for the ability to move managed lanes forward in Colorado and for bringing transit service to the corridor. There's been a very strong relationship between the locals and the state agencies, which was pretty critical. Prior to the adoption of the FASTER legislation that created the HPTE in 2009, there was a previous entity that had been created, the Colorado Tolling Enterprise, that had the legal ability to move tolling projects forward. But because there had been no corridor where locals were willing to support toll lanes or managed lanes, none of them had actually moved forward. And what really allowed this project to move forward was that the local governments saw the toll lane as an important step towards being able to bring bus rapid transit to the corridor. There was actually very interesting, the politics around the transit. There were many elected officials who were really focused on bringing rail service to the corridor. But ultimately it became clear that given the nature of this corridor, bus rapid transit on managed lanes could in fact provide a higher level of transit service and a better transit service than we would be able to get through rail. There was a lot of focus from the local governments in assuring that we would be moving towards true bus rapid transit, that we weren't just going to have a few express buses running in the toll lanes, but would have elements such as branded service, prepaid fares, real-time information on bus arrival times available at the stations, and very high-frequency service, so that ultimately we anticipate peak period service where there will be buses coming every 3 to 5 minutes. And the ridership projections are that by 2035, we'll have on the order of 19,000 riders per day. So really very similar to what we see on many of the rail corridors. The local governments also were able to work with CDOT and HPTE to sign an agreement that specifies a process for allocating excess toll revenues and specifies that those toll dollars will be used to help support both transit service and transportation demand management programs along the corridor. One of the interesting things in phase 2 of the process was that the negotiations to get a public-private partner did end up committing the toll revenues for a fairly long time period to the private partner in order to pay for the construction. And I think whenever we're looking at new construction as opposed to conversion of an HOV lane or conversion of some other existing lane, there's goals and tensions in terms of using toll revenues for construction versus using them to support transit service. And I think it is very important to think about what are our goals for those managed lanes. Next, please. So, as was mentioned back in 2009, the FASTER legislation created HPTE, authorized variable congestion tolls, and I think importantly made it clear that these were not just about doing road construction, but were specifically authorized for multimodal projects, would promote mobility, energy efficiency, and reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and really gave the policy basis for doing managed lanes that would have a focus on transit service. Next, please. The agreement that has been created between the local governments and CDOT and HPTE specifies a shared governance process for allocating the excess toll revenues when they will be available, and lays out the appropriate uses for those revenues. And the revenues cannot be spent outside of the corridor, and they specifically may be used for both transit capital and operating expenses, for first and final mile solutions, because what we saw is that in order for this transit service to really reach its maximum usefulness for the communities, and in order to maximize ridership, we are going to need to see additional improvements connecting the transit stops further into those communities, and that there would be support for transportation demand management, both for the necessary coordination of TDM programs along the corridor and for programs like helping to pay for transit passes in these mixed-use locations along the corridor. Next, please. One of the challenges, which I think is fairly universal, is that the PPP procurement process, by its nature, is less transparent than typical public processes. And in this case, the PPP process did end up committing the toll revenues for probably a longer time period than the local government officials had anticipated. And I think really is a challenge to figure out to what extent do you use the toll revenues to minimize the upfront public investment that is required in the infrastructure versus making those toll revenues available for expanding the transit service. In the case of US 36, this was not as critical because there were dedicated sales tax revenues from a public vote that had taken place in 2004 to expand the rapid transit infrastructure in the Denver region. But as we look to future corridors where there may not be those dedicated funds, I think this becomes a much more important issue to think through. And also to think through whether there's a way that one could actually create incentives for the PPP partners to actually support transit and HOV use as they move forward. And there really hasn't been, I think, a great deal of thinking about this. I was able to find one interesting paper that I reference here from 2010 that came from an FHWA staff person who had been working on the pricing pilot programs at FHWA, and that I think is well worth looking at for folks who are working on PPP contracting. Next, please. So I think the big policy issues really are the issues that Sarah Jo talked about at the start. How do we use tolling? Is it primarily a tool for financing new road construction? Or is it a tool for managing congestion and traffic for the long term and helping to finance transit and TDM programs? Next, please. One of the other things that I think is an important concern as we move towards more and more of our road construction being managed lanes are the equity issues around the use of public right-of-way and public investment in managed lanes, given the fact that while all income levels use managed lanes occasionally, higher income drivers use them much more regularly. And there's been analysis done in a number of communities, San Diego, Orange County, Minneapolis, Seattle, that shows that the regular drivers tend to be very high income. But I think that the way to address those equity concerns is not to not do managed lanes, but to make sure that you're offering first-class transit service in those corridors, given that transit is much more likely to be used by low-income and moderate-income residents in addition to those higher-income commuters. Next, please. In addition to the equity issue, I think that a focus on transit and a focus on high-occupancy vehicles can help to really maximize the transportation benefits of those toll lanes. And if we focus on maximizing the travel of people, not just vehicles, we can make the most of the investment. In order to do that, I think reinvesting a portion of toll operating revenues into the corridor for continued improvements and prioritizing travel choices with that concept of a portion of toll revenues supporting transit and TDM. Much easier to do if you're converting an existing lane and don't have significant capital expenses, but I think it's important to think through how we do that and how we can leverage other public funds in order to be able to do that as we build new managed lanes. Next, please. One of the really interesting concepts that has been developed recently that's come out of the Expressway Authority and Transit Agency in Tampa, Florida, is what they're calling transit toll lanes, in which the transit agency makes a capital investment in the toll lanes. The toll lanes then can serve as a platform for express bus and bus rapid transit service, very similar to the US 36 example, but where the transit agency essentially receives an equity stake in the toll lanes, where they receive an ongoing share of the toll revenues based upon essentially the percentage of capital investment that was made by the transit agency. We certainly did not pursue that in the US 36 example, but in fact the transit agency did put in significant capital investment into the project. And if we were thinking about future projects would be very interesting to think about negotiating essentially an equity stake for the transit agency in that project. Next, please. I would like to leave some time for questions, so let's go to the next one. One of the things that I think is important to start thinking more about is tolling existing lanes. In the early generation of hot lanes came from HOV conversions, which did make it possible to generate revenue for travel options. And it's clearly a very cost-effective to toll existing lanes rather than to build new ones. Allows you to set the tolls at lower levels and still generate excess revenue that can be invested in transit and TDM in order to maximize the benefits of these toll lanes. Next, please. It's clearly politically very challenging to look at conversion of existing lanes other than conversion of the existing HOV lanes. There are local, state, and federal challenges. In Colorado, the FASTER legislation did specifically authorize tolls on existing highways if you can get federal approval and if all of the impacted local governments agree. And I believe that in Colorado, at least, there are a number of places where one could conceive of it being politically possible to toll existing lanes. Those would include some segments of I-25 north of Denver that CDOT is actually considering tolling on. It would also include roadways that are very large roadways with many lanes that are highly constrained in terms of the ability to further expand them, that are experiencing significant congestion. And I believe that in Colorado, as for instance, residents of the southern portion of the Denver metro area start to see residents in the northern portion having congestion-free alternatives, or at least managed congestion alternatives on their roads, they in fact will become much more open to the idea of tolling some of the existing lanes on roads like the southern portion of I-25. And we are seeing that type of an approach begin to move forward. The Highway 101 in San Mateo County in California, there's serious consideration of that approach. Next, please. So in summary, I think that as we develop managed lanes, we should really think about those policy implications. That it's about not just moving vehicles, but how do we really move people in those toll lanes in order to maximize the transportation benefit, increase equity, and to make the public more likely to support toll lanes and build a constituency that will allow us to move towards managing existing lanes, which will be the most sort of cost-effective and environmentally sustainable way of addressing mobility on our highways. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. Here is Will's contact information. Again, these slides will all be up on the SSTI website by tomorrow morning, possibly even this afternoon. We do have time for some questions, and we do also have some questions that have come in. So I'll go ahead and start with the questions that have come in from our participants. Again, if you do have a question, just type it into the chat box that is on the left side of your screen, and we will be able to see it. We see a question that says, has development shared in the cost of providing access to the highway and transit system, or do they view the tolls as their contribution to the cost? I'm not sure who wants to take that. I'm sorry, I've got to unmute all the rest of my panelists here. I don't know, does anybody want to address that?
I mean, I can, from the Urban Land Institute perspective, we do have a lot of examples for what you're asking about as sort of a value capture, where developers contribute to the facility. And it's more typical that that happens around rail. And it's probably examples that you think of around either light rail, even sort of the heavy rail expansions that are happening, the few that are happening, and the streetcars where business improvement districts are putting in or taxing themselves for like doing a special assessment on a special district that is served. I think that it's possible that this could apply to bus, and I do know in some cases where we haven't studied this thoroughly, but I do know through the networks of cases where developers have at least approached different community members about whether their public benefits contribution that they have to make anyway could be part of a slip lane that is a sort of congestion pricing or congestion avoiding toll facility on something that accesses their land. I think that's a perfectly fair question to be going at. I can't pull any answers right off the top of my head of a specific bus example, but I've heard them discussed.
Okay, that's great.
Do you have one? I don't know if that has been part of the discussion in Colorado.
You know, along the 36 corridor, I can't really speak to the development in Broomfield. Within Boulder, there certainly have been partnerships among a variety of local public agencies and the University of Colorado to do improvements that provide better access to the BRT system, and the significant development that is happening around the northern terminus of the BRT system. There is not a developer direct contribution to it, but the landowners and developers have agreed to going from a free parking to a paid parking district, and the expectation is that parking revenues will be used to support transportation demand management and will be used to pay for transit passes ultimately for residents and employees in that transit village area around the northern terminus that will support the ridership on the system. But I don't believe that there is a direct infrastructure investment coming from the developers.
Okay, thanks. And we do have another question, and I'm going to let my colleague over here ask it because she's got an additional piece to it.
Yeah, there was a question, / comment related to good to see the fact that the presenters discussed the issue of social and economic equity, which I had also picked up on, and you know, Sarah and Will addressed it somewhat differently and had answers per what they were focusing on. And my question has to do with developments around the BRT stations that Sarah was talking about, but anybody who wants to answer is welcome to. As the supply of available housing, affordable housing near BRT stations is outstripped by demand, which there was an expectation that will eventually balance out. But while we're waiting for the supply of housing in those developments to level out, has there been any thought about how to address the housing equity so that folks who do need to use the transit as opposed to choose to use transit, those people also have access to housing near the BRT stations? Has there been any thought to that? If that makes sense, I hope.
So that does make sense. I can say that at again, the northern terminus of the BRT line in Boulder, the city of Boulder and the transit agency jointly purchased the land for the transit station. The transit agency is then developing the actual transit station, and the city has transferred their share of the land essentially to their housing authority for an affordable housing development. So there's market rate housing going in sort of across the street, but actually right on the location of the transit station itself. There will be on-site, fairly significant by the scale of a relatively small town, affordable housing to try to address that issue. But as additional development takes place, the only other mechanism that we have in place is an inclusionary zoning requirement that does require that 20% of the housing that is developed must be permanently affordable to low and moderate income residents.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
We were just trying to interpret a question here. Somebody had asked if revenue sharing from transit toll lanes has been implemented in the U.S., but I think that's what, that's what we're talking about here is the revenue sharing. But she does go on to ask if there are barriers to implementing this. And I was sort of wondering on the political side how difficult it was to get this idea through to use the revenues for other uses besides just supporting the highway, because that's what the normal use of toll lanes is. What was the political background to that?
I can address some of that. Since Plenary is putting up capital and they're taking the toll revenue risk, they have a target rate of return. It's not a guaranteed rate of return. Obviously, because traffic is not. Traffic. The study of traffic is more of an art science. So the deal is the agreement is once Plenary reaches their internal rate of return, and those revenues start coming in. I think like a percentage of those revenues can then go to TDM, which will then be the group of the people along the corridor will then be brought together, and they will decide on how that money will be spent. It's up in the air how long that's going to take for Plenary to reach their rate of return. So it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, it could be never. So for the life of the project, it just all depends on how well the project does. So that's there was that kind of that was kind of tough to swallow for some of the locals, but we had to balance the needs of the private partner as well as the needs of the community. I don't know, Will, do you want to go into any more of it? Because I know you were an integral part of putting that together as well.
Yeah, I'd say there were two aspects. One was at sort of the theoretical level when the state legislature was authorizing the creation of HPTE, and it was actually very non-controversial to set up a structure that allowed toll revenues to be used to support other modes. The thing that people were really concerned with was assuring that toll revenues would remain in the corridors and not be used for investments in other parts of the highway system. That there was a very strong sort of political push for, but very little controversy around authorizing the use of toll revenues for transit. In the 36 project, the local governments were very supportive of using toll revenues for transit, and I think that Nick described the dynamic perfectly, that because this is a new construction project, that really did have to be balanced out against the needs of the private partner in order to be able to actually finance the construction. And in this case, we had another source of revenue for the core transit project, so the additional toll revenues would allow us to enhance the project but aren't essential for it. I do think it becomes a more important issue as we look at other corridors that don't have that base level of transit funding.
Okay.
And if I can just, from the national perspective, I do agree that having the private sector partner complicates these. You just have another party with needs and another party that's trying to make the project and the deal work for them. It does complicate it. The other examples, there is not a private sector partner that I've seen anyway in the revenue sharing. But also one of the things, conceiving it from the beginning as part of your transit system, I think can help you anticipate these barriers much sooner than if you're trying to graft a transit system on what was really a highway project. So and that's the advice I've gotten from many different sources, that considering the transit from the very beginning, before you start even making these policy decisions, is the way to see the barriers and get over them.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I actually just had a really quick follow-up. Will had mentioned really briefly that maybe there were other areas along the Front Range there that were going to be, shall we say, jealous of this, these additional lanes and this higher quality, both reliability and speed on the commute, and also the enhanced transit. Are you seeing any kind of requests from maybe areas south of Denver to also have this similar type of treatment for their commute routes?
Yes. US 36, the coalition that was formed by the mayors and county commissioners along, and the stakeholders along the corridor, like 36 Commuting Solutions, is a model for other corridors in the Denver metro area and along the Front Range, for instance, I-25 North and C-470. Douglas County along C-470 and Jefferson County have formed a coalition of local governments and county governments to investigate a project down there. Currently, RTD doesn't serve C-470, but they are supportive of the project, and if they feel as though you know, transit is going to be worthwhile along there, I think they have the ability to step in and to offer service along there if there's a need. But yes, we are definitely seeing other communities and other step forward and say we're going to start putting something together similar to what US 36 did.
I think that's very interesting. We do have one final question, and I'm going to let Mary ask that. She's my colleague over here.
All right. This is kind of a two-part question. Start out with Nick mentioned that congestion is expected to reach a point where HOV3 will be needed eventually, and that is built into the corridor plan. So the first part of the question is, when is that expected to occur? A follow-up to that is, at the national level, with flat to declining per capita vehicle miles traveled that we're seeing nationwide, in place specificity might change that a bit, but do you think this trend will affect the toll revenue that you're anticipating, and is there a strategy to address this possibility?
To just your first question, the HOV3 question, right now we are seeing conditions along I-25 that could warrant moving over to HOV3, but we've raised tolls instead of going to HOV3. You know, yeah, I think still the idea is to go over on January 1, 2017, but I think it's going to be a continual reassessment of that as Phase 1 opens and then Phase 2 opens, whether or not we go to move to HOV3. And HOV3 is not going to just be US 36. There's going to be HOV3, and then the rest of the state is going to be HOV2. It's going to affect the entire state where there are, along, at least on the interstate, where there are current HOV2, they'll move to HOV3. So I think that's one of the one of the conditions that we agreed with the US 36 coalition, that if they go HOV3, it's not just going to be them, and we agreed with that. So did CDOT. In regards to the recent studies that showing that VMT has been declining, we have traffic and revenue studies, that are fairly conservative, that show traffic increasing, but not at like a high rate, but increasing to cover, in some, after a certain ramp-up period, at least the debt service. And if for some reason that tolls do not cover the debt service, there are certain, at least on the Phase 1 loan, we have an O&M reserve account, so there'll be money to cover operations maintenance. We have a backup loan agreement with CDOT. So we have protections in place in case that doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Well, we did go a little bit over, but that's okay. We had some interesting questions, and I'm going to just sort of wrap up here. I just want to remind folks that are still on that we will have a recording of this webinar up on our website by tomorrow morning at the latest. We also invite you to sign up for the SSTI e-newsletter, which comes out every 2 weeks. We have news of upcoming webinars, as well as reports, links to reports and articles of interest. You can also follow us on Twitter, and we'll post reminders of webinars, our newsletter, and other items of interest. We do have a webinar coming up Monday, October 28th, which is the TDM measures to reduce the impact of urban freight movement. You can sign up for that on our website and everything else, including the newsletter, at ssti.us. And I want to thank our speakers, Mary Jo Peterson, Nick Farber, and Will Toor. I think it was a great webinar, and I really appreciate your time today. And thanks to everybody for joining us.